Hey guys, how's it going? It's Target Audience here. Over the years, I've done quite a few tutorials showing you how to score, pass, and make plays. But one of the most requested tutorials by my fans that I haven't done is for Be a GM. A lot of people are looking for little tips and tricks to help their Be a GM careers, but some are completely new to the game mode. So if you're either of those people, then this video is totally for you. I'm going to be taking you through an entire season of Be a GM and focus on all the aspects you need to look out for when playing. First thing right off the bat is assessing your current roster. You need to look at both the main roster as well as the players that are in the system and establish a depth chart. A depth chart will allow you to easily see where players fit into your current system and what their future might look with your team. The first question you should be asking yourself is, do I have a playoff team? To answer this question, you need to determine how many players you have playing in the correct role. This means how many first line players do I have, how many second line players do I have, and so on. The more players you have for the correct roles, the more successful you're going to be during the season. Once you've made the determination on whether you are a playoff team or not, then you can proceed with moving towards your goal. If you determine that you are a playoff team and are ready to go getter, then you are much closer to starting your season. If you feel that you are almost a playoff team but lack a couple of pieces here and there, then you will have to do a little work to get your team in shape. Finally, if you feel that your team is nowhere near playoff contention and a rebuild is your only real choice, then you are going to do a little work too, but in a different sense. For the teams that are on the cusp of playoff contention, you need to look at your depth chart to see where improvements need to be made and where you might have a surplus of talent. For example, if you have 4 first-line forwards and no top-pairing defensemen, you might want to consider trading one of your first-liners for a top-end D-man. If you do not have a surplus on your NHL roster, then you might want to dip into your prospect pool and draft picks to acquire the piece that you need. Keep in mind that the 2015 draft is incredibly deep and that picks from this draft shouldn't be dealt without hesitation. If you are a rebuilding club and have aging veterans on your roster, you're going to want to purge your team of these players for prospects and picks. The key here is to load up on young talent from the 2015 draft so that you can pave the future for your organization. Acquiring these picks is easier said than done, but there are some tricks to ensure that you are maximizing a return. One thing you can do is trade green players for red players or picks. What this means is trade players the other team wants for players or picks the team wants to get rid of. When you go to the trading screen, you will see players' names or picks written in green, red, or white. Green players will appear on your team and it indicates that the other team is interested in that player. Red players will appear on the opposing team and indicate that the other team is interested in dealing that player. White players appear on both sides and indicate that the other team is either not that interested in acquiring your player or aren't that interested in dealing their player. You can also increase the value of your acquisitions by trading multiple players to one team. Be mindful of the cap space as well as the number of contracts that team has. If the trade puts a team too close to the cap limit, then they may reject the trade. The NHL can also void trades that cause a team to either infringe on the cap limit or put a team over the maximum contract limit. You can alleviate these two scenarios by either retaining cap on a player or by adding an additional player to the trade. We'll be getting into making trades later on, so don't worry if all of this doesn't make much sense right now. Another way to bolster your depth charts is through free agency. Before you start your first year, you can often find older yet serviceable players looking for one-year contracts at a very affordable rate. These players can be used to fill roles on your team that you currently lack. This will keep you from dealing potentially crucial players that will help your team later on. You can also sometimes find players with higher potential here in free agency, so don't get too eager to start the season without first having a look at free agency. There are many aspects of the simulation that require your attention in order to be successful throughout the year. Let's start with your roster. To have a successful roster, you need 4 key things. In order of importance, they are: number 1, players fulfilling correct roles; number 2, a balance of player types and skill sets; number 3, a balance of youth, prime-aged, and veteran players on each line; and number 4, players playing in their correct positions. In addition to the compilation of your roster, you also need to frequently assess player and team performance. I like to first check team standings and player stats at about the 2-month mark, and then reassess every month after that. Things you'll be looking for in team standings are goals for per game, goals against per game, your power play percentage, and your penalty kill percentage. You want to focus on the difference between goals for per game and goals against per game. The larger the gap, the more successful your team likely is, and can continue to be if they are monitored regularly. With power play and penalty kill percentage, you'll be able to determine if any adjustments need to be made to those units to be more effective. A good team will keep their power play at least 20% and their penalty kill at least 82%. Don't be afraid to replace more defensively minded defensemen with depth scoring forwards to help spark something on the power plays. When it comes to player stats, you'll be looking for points and plus minus. Top line forwards should be putting up close to, if not exceeding, 1 point per game. For second line players, you should expect somewhere near a point per game, but by the end of the season, they should be around 55 to 65 points. Anything more than that is truly a blessing, and you're completely lucky. Third and fourth line players usually don't score too much throughout the year, but it all depends on how your team is assembled. It'll be up to you to decide if their numbers are in a nice range for that line. For goalies, the key is save percentage. Goals against average is more of a reflection of your team's ability to defend, as opposed to that goalie's ability to make the saves. Elite goalies should be putting up about a .920 save percentage, and I like to use this as a benchmark to determine if my goalie is doing what it takes to give my team a chance night after night. Like I mentioned earlier, there are 4 key things to icing a successful roster. When it comes to assembling lines, I like to try to focus on the following rules. For my top 2 lines, number 1, I'll assemble 1 young player that's 26 years of age and under, 1 prime player that's 27 to 33, and 1 veteran player that's 34 years of age and older. On the top lines, it's okay to have 2 prime players because these players usually have the highest offensive ability, but never exceed more than 1 young player per line. The reason why we focus on older players is because those players usually have higher poise. Poise is a factor that many people don't take into consideration. It will help with development of young players and also help teams succeed later into the season and playoffs. A team that lacks poise will noticeably suffer after the trade deadline. The second thing that I do for my top 2 lines is the player type. So I'll assemble 1 playmaker, 1 sniper, and 1 defensively minded player. When I said playmaker and sniper, I don't necessarily mean those specific player types, but players who bring those qualities. So for playmakers, I look for players with 90 plus passing and around about 90 offensive awareness. For snipers, I look for players with 88 plus in their shooting categories and also around 90 offensive awareness. And then for defensive-minded players, I look for about a 4.5 star defensive category with focus on defensive awareness, stick checking, and shot blocking. And it is possible for 1 player to occupy more than one of these roles, which is basically the perfect scenario. For my third line, I like to treat them as a secondary scoring unit. I'll usually play 2 offensively minded players with an incredibly defensively minded player. I like to keep this line with as many prime-aged and veteran players as possible, because this line needs the experience to be successful. Younger players tend to be streaky and inconsistent, whereas veterans tend to be more consistent, and when you're playing fewer minutes, you need to take advantage of all the ice time that you get. For my fourth line, I like to run a gritty, tough trio that aren't afraid of tough minutes. I usually fill this line with grinders, two-way forwards, and power forwards. I make sure to keep these players as high defensive categories as possible, but when it comes to the fourth line, this isn't always possible. It is okay to run with 2 young players here if you so choose, but I wouldn't play anyone that has more than a 3.5 yellow star potential on the fourth line. There just isn't enough opportunity for them here to grow, and their time would be better spent in the AHL where they'll get more top-end minutes. When it comes to defense, the same thing applies. For my top pairing, I like to keep to the rules of hut chemistry. I will usually roll with either an offensive defenseman and a defensive defenseman, or with 2 two-way defensemen. With D-men, it is crucial not to pair 2 young players together, as they don't have the experience yet to deal with the rigors of a full NHL schedule. But pay attention to poise. Some young players have tremendous poise right out of the gate. Don't discount young players without first assessing poise. Before you can truly start your season, and this goes for every season, not just the first one, you need to do a couple of small things. Number one, you need to set your scouting assignment. Scouting is so crucial in this game that you need to take advantage of every day. Number two, adjust your team support staff in GM Tracker. If you're playing without injuries, then you won't have to worry about the medical field. But in terms of importance, I would say start with amateur scout and pro scout. Upgrading the assistant coach really isn't that necessary unless you're playing a lot of the games as opposed to simulating them. Number three, set your trade block. Make sure to adjust your trade block to reflect your team's current needs. There are always adjustments that can be made to a roster that make it better, so don't be afraid to get in there and mix it up. The trade block can be a daunting task though, but don't skip by it just because of this. Actually take the time to assess your team's wants and their surplus so that you can get trades that actually make your team better. Number four, trade players who have absolutely zero purpose to you in both the short and long term. This usually applies to just the first year, and I'm talking about those veteran AHL players or prospects with incredibly low potential. These players will usually only garner a small return like a 5th or a 6th round pick, but in my opinion, it's better to trade them away for these picks than to keep them on your roster, taking up space when it comes to the next couple years off seasons where you have the ability to pick up high-end players from free agency. So with all that set, you are good to go. While the simulation is going, make sure to keep your eyes not only focused on your team's performance, but on your players' individual performance on the right-hand side. Focus on their goals, assists, and points per game to see where they sit. You can expect your team to have some players that pour on very strongly early in the year right off the bat, but will trail off later in the season. This is usually the result of lower poise, and you will notice this. You will also want to make sure to stop simulations to deal with injuries, scouting, trades, and waiver claims. Never, ever, ever leave any deal on the table without first having a good look at the benefits and the costs. As you approach the trade deadline, you're going to want to make sure you reassess your team's wants and surplus in the trade block. Leading up to the deadline, you will likely field a number of trades from teams wanting to deal for various reasons. You will also likely want to make some changes yourself, unless you're incredibly successful and feel the best thing to do is just let sleeping dogs lie. It is also at this point that you will make the decision if you will be buyers or sellers at the deadline. This will be completely up to you to do because each season simulation is different. It all depends on the points your team has versus the points other teams have. Take some time to familiarize yourself with the NHL's wildcard playoff system before you make the buy-sell decision. Understanding how that system works could end up being a huge difference. Buyers tend to trade top-end picks and prospects for proven NHL talent that they lack on their current roster, whereas sellers tend to trade proven NHL talent for top-end picks and prospects. If you were a rebuilder at the beginning of the season, take this opportunity to decide who you'll be dumping come the deadline. EA has built a trade deadline mini simulation into the game where you have a certain amount of time to make the trades you want. But to be honest, the easiest way to deal with the deadline is to make all your trades before the actual deadline. This will give you ample time to wheel and deal and also prevent you from being cut off too early when making the trades that you want. So do it before you get into the trade deadline. Making trades in NHL 15 is based on 4 things. Number 1, asset desirability to your trade partner. Number 2, asset value. Number 3, relationship with your trade partner. And number 4, your trade partner's trade block. I mentioned earlier that dealing green for red players is the best way to make a trade go through, but you also need to make sure that the value of the assets going in their direction matches or exceeds the value of the assets coming in return. However, the relationship your team has with your trade partner can also affect your ability to make the trades. If you have a great relationship with that team, you may find that you can actually trade assets that have lower value for assets of higher value. If you have a poor relationship with that team, you may find it very hard to acquire assets from them without overextending. Many common trades that users like to make are uneven asset quantity trades. What this means is trading 2 or more players for 1. There are a couple of problems you may run into when making these trades. The first is that the team you are trading with has too many contracts, and thus can't take on another player that has a signed contract. To alleviate this, you can add another player from their team that has low trade value and that they want to get rid of. Keep adding players until the NHL trade approval box becomes a green check mark. Another solution is to replace one of your players with unsigned prospects or draft picks. These assets do not have contracts, and thus do not affect the other team's contract limit. The second problem you may run into is that you are dealing multiple players that fill the same role. For example, if you send a team 3 prospect defensemen in return for one of their assets, they may reject the trade. Try to keep variety in your trades, no matter what team you are trading with. Reviewing your trade partner's trading block can also help you tremendously when it comes to swaying a trade your way. If you're looking to acquire big name players in a hurry, you can always deal future first round picks to teams in exchange for those players. Future picks often carry decently significant value, and when paired with another skilled player or other future firsts, can return a very good player indeed. If you decide to go this route, it's in your team's best interest to reacquire those assets at a future date. There are 3 main things you need to focus on when it comes to starting your offseason. The first is the list of retirements. This occurs just before the top prospects game. The reason why you want to pay close attention here is to see if any of your roster players have decided to head to greener pastures. You don't want to be caught unaware when it comes time for the Resize Phase or free agency. The second thing to focus on is the top prospects game. Your amateur scout will report to you with his recommendations based on performance in this game. I would recommend documenting the scout's top 5 selections so you can reference them with the overall draft rankings. We'll discuss this more later. The third and final thing to check is your trade block. At the end of the postseason, your needs may have changed based on your team's performance. Make sure that everything here still reflects your team's current needs. Now it's on to the NHL draft. The NHL entry draft is by far one of the most important aspects of building a competitive team. You need to focus on adding top-end talent, but also making sure you steal some late rounders as well. To do this, you will need to have a look at a few different places. The first thing that I do is take a look at the top 10 skaters and goalies in the draft. I like to make a list of these top 10 and then flag each skater that plays in the CHL. I'll explain why we do that in a second. The next step is to assess where your scout's recommended players fall in the draft rankings. This will keep you from overextending and drafting them too soon in what is known as going off the board. Find the players from your list in the rankings and make sure you document where they are projected to go. To easily find the players you are looking for, try sorting by position to help eliminate some of the names. The final step to draft prep is to go into the top prospect game stats. Here we will be able to see the players' overalls. Again, the best way to sort through them all is by going by position. You will want to find out the overall of the 5 players recommended by your scout and also the top 10 as indicated by the scouting report. Remember how we flagged those CHL players when we did this? That's because only CHL players appear in the top prospects game. So unfortunately, they're the only players we'll be able to determine the overall of. After you have found the overalls of your top 5 from the scout and the overalls of the CHL players in the top 10, then you should make a list of all other players in the prospects game that are at least 70 overall. Once you've made that list, you'll go back to the scouting report and find those players in the draft rankings. Now that you have all your players ranked and rated, you should make a draft priority list. Based on your team's current depth chart and prospect list, you should determine what types of players and positions you'd like to add. List your needs in order of importance. The idea of the draft is to address weaknesses in your overall roster. The only time you would not draft with need is if the pick you hold is higher than the ranking of the player who best fits the position you need. So if you hold the top pick and you need a D-man, but there are no good D-man available until later in the first round, then select the best player available. Before you begin, it's a good idea to refresh your memory of what picks you actually have available. To do this, go to your trading block and go to players on the block. Once there, select a spot and scroll all the way to the top of the list of players. You will find all the picks available to you as well. This is a quick and easy way to see what you have to work with. As you go through the draft, keep focused on what players you would like to select and their draft rank. Keep in mind that player rankings can fluctuate once you enter the draft, so it's a good idea to have another look at the rankings when you get ready to make your first selection. Welcome to the Resize Phase. This is where you'll be giving new contracts to players for the upcoming season. This would be the ideal moment to update your depth chart as well as your prospect list so that you have a better idea of where your team stands. Once you have somewhat of an idea of what your lineup might look like for the coming season, re-sign the players you need. To maximize contract value and to get the cheapest contract price for that player, multiply their asking price by 0.85. You will then round this number up to the nearest half thousandth. So if a player is asking 2.575 for 3 years, multiply 2.575 by 0.85 and you will get 2.188. You will then round this number up to 2.190. I know, it's a little bit dry, a little bit boring to do that, but that is the lowest amount the player will take. And if you repeat this for all re-signs, you're going to save a ton of money. When it comes to re-signing prospects, I would recommend keeping them completely unsigned until they become RFAs or UFAs. The reason being is that you will be acquiring a ton of prospects over the course of your career, and keeping contracts at a minimum will help you pick up players in free agency or make trades with other teams. The only time that I would actually sign players before they become an RFA or a UFA is when they're 20 years of age or older and serviceable players. That means that they'll be able to play in the AHL. I would recommend only signing prospects 3.5 yellow stars and above, so 4 and 4.5 red stars would be suitable to sign as well. The reason being is that 3.5 red stars are a dime a dozen, and to be honest, 3.5 yellow star players become quite plentiful too. You may find later on down the road that you can't keep that many 3.5 yellow star players, and that's okay. This is why the prospect list is a good tool. It keeps track of the number of players you have signed, and you can better gauge who is part of the future. If you do encounter players who are below 3.5 yellow star potential, then I would just release them to free agency when it comes time. Free agency is a time for you to pick up supplementary talent that can help your team immediately. Sometimes big name players like Kopitar, Taze, and Okposa will slip to free agency, and if you have managed your roster correctly, you should have enough to grab one of these players. There are a couple of things you need to be mindful of when signing free agents. Number one, your current number of contracts. You are only allowed 50 contracts total, with a maximum number of goalies at 6 and the maximum number of forwards or skaters at 44. Number two, the length of the contract and how it could affect you long term. And number three, is the player worth the roster spot? Sometimes players may be good, but their purpose may be served by somebody else at the beginning of the next season due to the player growth that occurs on September 13th. In addition to signing roster players, make sure you take a look at prospects too. Oftentimes you will find that players with high potential will slip to free agency due to contract issues with their original teams. I have managed to snag multiple 4.5 star goaltenders from free agency, so always have a look at both skaters and goalies. This is why it is so important to not fill your team to the gills with contracts. If you do find that you have too many contracts signed, go and trade those players away because their value is lower than the player you're going to be signing. When it comes to actually offering the contracts, if you really want that player and there are multiple teams interested, you will have to offer approximately $500,000 more than their asking price to secure their services. Now, just because you've offered more doesn't mean they will sign with you. The relationships you establish with your free agents will dictate future interactions with other free agents. Your pro scout will advise you when you are negatively affecting your relationships. Year 2 begins just like year 1 did. Lather, rinse, repeat. Get your year started with the exact same steps, making sure not to miss anything. Get your trade blocks set up, get your line set up, your scouting, and then you're off to the races. Let me introduce you to the BGM Support Document. This is a spreadsheet created in Google Sheets. You can use it from your computer or by using the Google Sheets app for iOS or Android. The document keeps track of a number of things. The first is your prospect list. The prospect list is something I use to track all players not in the NHL but under the age of 27. It will allow you to keep tabs on your player growth as well as contracts and draft status. This list is incredibly intuitive and when used properly will really help you visualize your team's future. It can be a little bit of a pain in the butt to set up originally, but long term it's a huge benefit. So spend the time right away to do that so that down the road it's much easier to deal with. The second part is the depth chart. This allows you to see what your starting lines will be like for both the NHL and the AHL. It also has room to display players who have contracts but aren't being played due to personnel issues, and will give you a better idea of who to keep and who to trade. The third part is the draft list. Here you can list the players recommended by the scout, the top 10 based on the scouting report, players rated 70 overall and higher from the top prospects game, your draft priority list, and also the players you selected in the draft so that you can reference it come re-sign phase. Finally, it's the team stats. This will allow you to track your goals for per game, goals against per game, power play, and penalty kill throughout the year. It will also give you feedback based on your numbers. Green boxes mean that you have a good rating or percentage. Yellow means average and red means poor. This will help you gauge how much improvement your team needs in these areas. In order to download this document, the link is down in the description below. You'll have to open it using Google Drive, and then you'll have to get it into your Google Sheets. Well guys, that's it for this one. I hope you learned something valuable that you can take to use in your BGMs and make you more successful. If you liked the video, hit the like button. If you want to leave a comment and let me know how it worked for you or what you thought of the video, please do. I read every comment. Follow me on Twitter, guys, at TargetAud18. I love interacting with my fans there. I'll leave it at that. Until next time, I'm Target Audience, and I'll catch you guys out on the ice.